So one of my roles at BLP is to support business advisors with the skills they need to provide high quality advisory services. And so it's my pleasure to host this webinar series on business advisor skills. In this series, we're looking at the range of skills and the technical areas of knowledge that our business advisors need to provide high quality business advice. And we share experiences on what it takes to be a great business advisor. So last month, we spoke with Gautam Kishore from EIF International about exporting, for those of you that joined us last time, you'll recall. Now, following on from that, in today's session, we're going to turn our attention to international standards and certification programs, which can also be important assets that can assist with accessing export markets. So today our guests will be Aphiame Thegumalwa and David Haberfield from HACCP Australia and Fiji. And the webinar today will probably take us just a little bit over an hour because there's quite a lot of ground that we're going to be covering. Firstly, though, I'd like to quickly go over the format of the webinar today and also provide a very short update on BLP's activities. So now that we've started, can I ask, if you haven't already, to please keep your microphones and your cameras off, as this really helps us to ensure a clear connection for everyone. Please do feel free, though, to ask questions throughout the webinar, and you can do that by using the chat box, which you'll find in the top right-hand corner of your window. And we do welcome your thoughts and your comments and your questions throughout the whole webinar. There'll also be a specific time for questions at the end. So please do pop your comments in the box as you go, if you wish. So now we're recording our webinar today, so you will also be able to access and recap on it afterwards, along with all of our other webinars, actually. So just go to the portal and you can look for webinars and you'll find all of them there. So let me just give you a very quick rundown of what we do here at Business Link Pacific. So firstly, BLP is managed by DT Global and it's funded by the New Zealand government. We help SMEs, that's small and medium-sized enterprises, to find suitable advisors to help them with their business issues. And then we help them with the cost of those advisory services through our subsidy scheme. All BLP approved advisors go through a quality assurance process, which includes both a due diligence process and a competency assessment. So SMEs can be absolutely assured that they're getting high quality professional advice. And we work through professional advisors because we know that businesses do so much better when they have access to professional advice. Now we're working in 8 Pacific countries, which are listed on this slide here. Our recent 2 additions are Kiribati and Tonga. And so we're still encouraging business advisors in these countries in particular to register with us as we're still building up our networks in Kiribati and Tonga. But otherwise you can see the other countries up there that we're working in, and we've got well-established networks of business advisors. We also have in-country representatives in each of our countries, including Kiribati and Tonga. It's our business service managers who are locally based, and their role is, of course, to support both SMEs and advisors to access BLP services. Our services include our SME Hub, where you can find a suite of business tools that help SMEs, and that's things like our diagnostic tool, the Business Health Check, Business Continuity Planner, Finance Finder tool. So there's a range of tools there. We also have the BLP Finance Facility, which helps provide access to finance through the BLP adaptation grants, concessionary loans, and of course subsidies for advisory services. Actually, we're currently assessing over 2,000 applications for our recent round of adaptation grants. It's actually our 2nd round of grants this year. So quite a bit of work there and a lot of interest in those grants. Our other services include professional development for advisors. There's our webinar and webinar series, of course, these webinars, and our podcasts, as well as customised professional development for advisors. So that's a little bit about our services. And as a result of all of that, well, we now have well over 135 approved advisory firms. We've got a growing network of SMEs that have received our subsidies and grants, and those support areas have helped them to adapt their businesses, particularly in light of the COVID situation. I think at the last count in June, over 800 businesses had accessed our subsidy scheme. Sorry, I'm just and our online business tools are actually being really well utilised. So as you can see there on the slide, something like 3,000 odd health checks have been done. Yeah, as a result of all of these services, we believe that there's been over 400 new jobs created through our networks, 40% of which have been taken up by women. So that's really great to see. And that's a little bit about our progress so far. So I'd now like to introduce you to our two guests today. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Apiyame Thegumalawa, who is based in Fiji. She is a food technologist and by profession. She has more than 30 years of food manufacturing experience. Her expertise is in food safety and quality assurance. And she's actually worked with many companies around Fiji and also the Pacific region to help them achieve food safety standards, particularly HACCP, which we're going to talk some more about today. So in particular, Apiyame has helped with the development of ginger and pandanus juice processing for export. And currently she's the project manager for HACCP Australia Fiji Limited. So she's doing food safety training and auditing for companies, and she particularly enjoys working with women in food production businesses. So welcome along, Api, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Barbara.
It's good to have you here. I'd also like to welcome along David Haberfield. And now both David and Api work for HACCP Australia Fiji, which is, of course, a leading food science consultancy specialising in HACCP, which we're going to learn more about today. David is a director and he's based in New South Wales and a very senior HACCP practitioner in the region. And he has supported over 300 businesses to implement HACCP systems in particular. That's across Australia and the Pacific and also across many different industries. His background actually stems from the dairying sector, in which he has more than 40 years experience. So welcome to you also, David, and thank you both, as I say, for being here today. We're very lucky to have you with us. So thank you for joining us.
No worries. Thank you, Barbara.
Perhaps I can start by, well, asking you both really to tell us a little bit about what you do at HACCP Australia Fiji Limited. Tell us a bit about your firm.
So we started working in the Pacific probably about 10 years ago, and we started with a project in New Guinea.
Right.
And we ended up getting some projects with Farmer Plus, which is a sister company to BLP.
That's right.
Part of the DT Global.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that sort of snowballed and got to the point where we were servicing these projects out of Australia. And then we started to realise we needed some feet on the ground, and we went looking and we found Apiyame, and she's been a wonderful addition to our team. She's based in Fiji, but she's also travelled widely around the network when we could. So we've done a lot of projects helping people from all different businesses. VCO, root crops, vegetables, kava, honey, you name it, noni, basically all the commodities in the Pacific. We've probably done a project on that.
Excellent.
So you got any comments, Appy?
Maybe just talk about a little bit of what I do. I've been working with the HESEP Australia from 2017. And what I actually do really is promoting certification to the exporters and to food businesses and telling them, really encouraging them to get on this wagon and get their product or their company certified, because it is very important for us in the Pacific. We've had this bad reputation about our product going overseas. It's always looked at as it's of poor quality. Product coming from the Pacific, poor quality. And I've seen it with my own eyes too when I go to New Zealand and go to Australia. And this is why it is so important to get on this certification program and be able to just improve our standard of preparation, standard of quality and safety. So I work with David. In collaboration. Always, he's my director. He's my boss, who is based in Australia. And what I do is like encouraging the exporters. With the development of HESEP, I guide them, I monitor them, and until they reach a standard that they are ready for external audit, and I do a pre-audit. And I have also been carrying out HESEP audit, and with this COVID, I've been asked to do organic audit, and also now the SGS is coming through, which I will now being trained to actually do that as well, because the auditors are not coming now. They cannot travel to Fiji, so they're looking for somebody to do it for them. So I'm really happy to be doing that for them, and with HESEP support, because I've got about 20 food technologies out there behind me in a station in Australia that are backing me up and are supporting me. So I'm really enjoying my work here, and I look forward to really working with other advisors or with the companies that need certification.
Oh, that's fantastic, Appy. Thank you both. And I mean, we're very lucky to have you both. You've clearly got lots and lots of experience, and really important experience getting those systems and processes and food safety in place. So it's going to be really interesting talking to you today. So let's kick into it. So in today's session, we're really going to be covering 4 key topics. So as I mentioned earlier, gaining accreditation to a recognised standards program, and particularly an internationally recognised program, can really help your business to start exporting. And that's because international markets, they need some sort of assurance that the products that they're going to be importing are worth the expense and the effort required. So for those of you that were on last month's webinar, we saw just how involved the exporting process can be. Well, it is very involved. There's many players involved in it. So that means that, you know, there's quite a lot of expense to it. So you really have to make that effort and expense worthwhile. And in order to do that, you need a certain level of assurance that the product is going to meet the consumer's expectations. So meeting an international standard and certification program gives that assurance. So this is where you've got that link with an internationally recognized standard and exporting. So often exporters will need to put something like that in place. So David, perhaps I can ask you to open up the first topic on risk management and perhaps comment and tell us why risk management underpins getting your business certified into a standards program.
Okay, yeah. So risk management is one of the fundamental things that we really try and get our clients to understand across the Pacific. And if businesses and employees and owners understand how to manage risk, they make their business a lot more successful. So if you just flick on to the next slide, what we're going to talk about is just a little introduction into risk management and what it's all about, because it is a fairly simple process. And essentially it has 3 steps. So when we manage risk, if we just go to the next one, we do these 3 steps, and we do this for HACCP, but we also look at the other key areas of the business
31 altogether.
because if we look at risk across the business as a whole and manage it well, we make the business a lot safer. So when we do a risk assessment, we do these three things. We identify, we assess, and we control. And this process was originally developed by NASA. And NASA provided the foundation for HACCP as well. And what this risk management process enabled NASA to do was sort out the wood from the trees. Because when they were putting people into space, they worked out that they had many things that could go wrong. And by putting in an assessment process, like you can see in front of us, where they're looking at the likelihood and the consequences of each risk that they've identified, what we can do is we can separate them into high, medium, and low risks. And of course, we're going to work on the high ones first because they pose the greatest risk to our business. And we definitely do this with HACCP. When we get into control, the basic premise of control is embodied in the pyramid we have here. And this is called the risk hierarchy, or the hierarchy of control. And at the top, we have eliminate. And we always want to eliminate, but often to get to that point, it's very expensive. So we often start at the bottom where we protect our workers and our products. Then we put in systems which are administrative type. Then we add some special engineering things. We create some equipment or things to make our job easier. And those three things which form the foundation of the hierarchy of control are really important, because we might not get further up the ladder because of cost. So when we manage risk, we think about what we call the 5 jeopardy areas of our business. And as you can see, they're outlined here. Worker safety, always number one, because if we don't manage risk and protect our workers, we're going to hurt people, we're going to kill people, we're going to get a really bad reputation, and that's going to put our business in jeopardy. Food safety is number 2, because if we bugger that up, people die, and they're our customers, and that's not real good for business either. With these first 2, the hazards are quite different. So when we're looking at worker safety hazards, they could be slips, trips, falls, falling off a ladder, getting run over by a vehicle, getting burnt, getting cut. All of those different hazards. They're quite different to food safety hazards, which focus on contamination of our food products. And they're simply either chemical contamination, physical contamination, so insects, rats, nuts and bolts, or microcontamination. And that's typically very dangerous bacteria that make people very sick. So the hazards are different, but the steps are the same. We've got to identify what the hazards are. We've got to then look at how important the hazards are or how risky they are. Then we've got to put in place some controls. So it follows through. Now, the last 3, normally if we have poor quality, there might be something wrong with the packaging or the flavor or the appearance or the label's crooked. That normally doesn't kill our customers. But when we're working in those export markets that are top rate, that gets our customers cranky and puts our business in jeopardy. So we focus on that as well. Environment, that is so important these days. We all know the things that the challenges we're facing in the Pacific. Global warming, pollution, the garbage patch, it's endless. Overfishing, you name it. So we've got to understand the risks of our environment, and we've got to put in place controls to manage it. And then the last one is productivity. And this essentially is the management of all our resources and inputs into the business. So that might be raw materials, equipment, buildings, people, you name it. If we don't manage those resources efficiently and utilize them properly, our business will be in jeopardy because we could go broke. So we apply these principles to everything we do with the business. And both Appy and I have a passion and a focus for food safety. But as auditors and as experienced production people, if we see something that we believe is unsafe in the business, we let people know, because it's our duty of care that we need to make sure that people are aware. Oh, do you realize that's unsafe? You could harm your workers. It's not HACCP, but it's a big part of the 5 jeopardy areas, and it's the way we protect our businesses.
So David, are you, so obviously this is around food production mainly, but many standards are related to food production. But are you saying that many international standards tend to cover these 5 kind of broad aspects around business? Is that what they all tend to cover, not just HACCP?
Yeah, look, definitely. If you look at any of the other standards we're going to talk about, the GAP standards, the good agricultural product, GMP, all of the GFSI, ISO, it's all about understanding your business and putting in place controls to help you manage your business.
And actually,
making it complicated.
Yeah. And when I think back, I was just reflecting. Last year, we ran a webinar on lean efficiency. And when I think about it, those lean efficiency programs, they also take a very similar approach. They include those 5 elements, so whether you're looking at something like total quality management, TQM or Six Sigma, they're very similar. Worker safety is up there, quality, how you treat the environment, productivity, they're all key to those lean programs as well. So that's really interesting that we've nailed it to those 5 key areas.
And one of the things we really try and do with everyone we work with is, if we can get everyone in the business to recognize and manage risk, it makes the whole business better. And we're talking right down to the person who cleans the toilets.
Yeah.
If they understand it, it reduces risk.
Yeah. And actually, next month we're going to be focusing again on risk, perhaps in a little bit more detail. So you look out for that webinar next month as well. So no, thank you for that introduction. Really important to highlight that risk management. So let's have a little look at some of the standards that we're talking about. I'm quite mindful that we're using this terminology HACCP, that people might not understand what it stands for. So that's certainly one of the internationally recognized standards that I know is very well known in the Pacific. But there are a whole range of different standards. So because of that, we've kind of clumped them into 3 sort of group areas. So Appy, can I ask you to tell us about some of the more commonly used ones in the Pacific?
Thank you, Barbara. Before I go into that, the most common standard in the Pacific I find when I move around is the food safety regulations that are developed by each country. Mm-hmm. And these are all based on codex. But this has limitations, because whenever I come to a factory and I said, do you have any standards? He said, yes, we have. And these are national standards. but it has its limitation. It cannot get their product across to New Zealand or across to Australia because
Right.
it's not recognized by the importing country. So this is where we come in. Yeah.
Mhm.
So the most common one is HACCP, as David was talking about. It's really a common sense approach, like you were saying. It's a risk management strategy or system where we identify the hazard, we assess the hazard, and we control the hazard from the start, from when you're receiving the product right through the processing to the end product when you pack and to dispatch. And that is HACCP. And the other one is with HACCP, we get away with the traditional, the traditional system of testing the end product, which we used to do before. And at the end of a process, after 2 days, then we test the product, which may take about 5 days to get the result. And then you find out, oh, your product was bad. Your product was contaminated. And it's too late then. You've spent a lot of money and that, and it's a cost. So this is why HACCP is so important. It looks at the hazards right throughout the system. The other one is good manufacturing practices. And these are commonly used by a lot of factories that I visited. They are doing it, but they don't understand. And they don't do it properly or efficiently. GMP ensures that products are consistently produced and controlled according to quality and safety standards. And the 5 key areas here, or the 5 key elements, are the 5 Ps, which are people, I think, premises, processes, products, and procedures. Those 5 key areas, which should
So quite similar to those 5 areas that David spoke about.
right. Yeah. So that's the good manufacturing properly. Look after those, and you'll be right with safety and quality. And the other quick one on GAP. GAP is a good agriculture practice that David has mentioned a little bit about, and it's a certification system for agriculture, which specifies the procedures that should be implemented to produce safe and quality foods for consumers. And the other one is organic certification. In the Pacific, we have the POETCOM, which is the Pacific Organic Standard, which was developed. And this one ensures that farmers or handling facilities should comply to organic regulations and allows producers to sell and label their product or represent their product as organic. So those are, I think, some of the most common ones.
Right.
Most common
So
ones.
we've mentioned HACCP quite a bit. So perhaps I could just get you to talk a little bit more about what HACCP is and does. Just explain a little bit more about that concept. So when you're working with a client, a company, what do you do to implement HACCP?
Good. The HACCP stands for Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. It's a food safety system to prevent risks, to prevent hazards, to prevent hazards in or contaminants in our product, and to ensure that the product that is produced is safe. What I normally do when there's an interest, from a company, what I normally do is carry out a need analysis first. Carry out a need analysis and look at their factory. Actually, look at their setup. Look at their factory, and come up with a report for the development of the program, which is done by one of our experts in Australia, developing their HACCP manual. And when we get there, then I do all the training, I do the monitoring, I do the guidance, I guide them. It takes about 3 months. It's not an overnight thing. It takes about 3 months. Training, guiding them, monitoring the process until I know that they're almost ready to be audited by an external auditor. That's when I do a pre-audit.
Okay, so the HACCP system then, I mean, it follows those five business areas that David spoke about, but it kind of breaks it down into even more, really. So they're kind of like modules, aren't they?
Yes.
Can you explain what those modules are?
These are support system. This circles in blue. These are support system or the prerequisite program that we called it. And without this prerequisite implementation or or practices, we cannot get HACCP. So this is what we do first. We normally train them first on those prerequisite program, like training, like pest control. If they normally, like just say for pest control, if they some of the companies, they do their own, but it's always good to get a contracted pest control company to come, because they know better. They know better kind of chemical to use and so on. With allergen, like Fiji, we never heard of allergen before. I don't know, in the Pacific, we never knew there was some food that will cause you allergen, like peanuts, like milk, wheat, gluten. We had no idea. But it's happening now. People are becoming sick because of some of the food that they eat is affecting their system. So we always make sure that every food processor must have a list of allergen and know that this kind of product, if it is used in their production, then they must ensure that it's well kept and it's labeled on the packaging material, and it must be ensure that it does not contaminate other products that they may be producing. And
so the HACCP framework, then, those support programs, or if I just go back to, I mean, this kind of captures the modules, if you like, or those individual programs, as I think you might call them, within the HACCP certification. They kind of do the thinking for you, don't they? They provide the framework for what a business really needs to look at. So you mentioned, like allergen management program. So, you mentioned that, you probably didn't even think about allergies beforehand, but it gets you to think about it. How are you going to control allergy in your business? If people have allergies to certain foods, how are you going to manage that? How are you going to accommodate that in your product when you make it? So, I mean, it's quite helpful, isn't it? Not only to get your product meet a certain standard, but it's also really helpful as a kind of thinking framework, I guess, and basing your business on all of these good practices. Yeah,
that's where the training comes in, Barbara.
Right.
When we train them, these are the things that we train them for, to ensure that they know, they have a list of allergens, so that people bring in lunch, they bring in snacks into the factory. They bring all sorts of things, so that they must be careful not to allow those kind of food into the factory, into the process line, because like peanuts, any small amount of peanuts can really affect people, and some can die from that. Yeah.
So the other way to think about the system too, Barbara, is the critical control points, as you can see on the other diagram, they're in the middle. And these are the things that we've identified that manage the most of the hazards. And these are steps that are things like cooking or cooling or keeping sensitive products cold throughout the whole cold chain and stuff like that. So they are non-negotiable.
Right. Yeah.
But around the outside, the support programs, or we often call them PRPs, or prerequisite programs. And what that essentially means is that before you make a product, you've got to have all of those PRPs, those things that they've got to be there before you start.
Right.
So you've got to have training. You've got to have pest control. You've got to have a way to clean your factory and manage your vendors. So all of those things, they're not CCPs, but they're an important part of the puzzle.
Okay, so that's the support program elements, if you like, and that's where you've got to have systems around that, as well as those key control areas.
Yeah, so when NASA developed HACCP, they based it on the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 rule. You've probably heard of that, have you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so
With that.
CCPs are the 20% of the hazards that we're going to identify in your business, but they're going to manage 80% of your food safety risk. So it's like the vital few, and the support systems are the trivial many. So everything has to be done, but it's got to work in unison. And, for example, hand washing is really, really important. And as we all know from COVID, we can't run a business without it. But hand washing is not a critical control point. It's a PRP.
Okay.
Because it would be ridiculous for us to write down and record every time we washed our hands.
Right.
Which you have to do for a CCP.
Okay. Okay.
Does that help to make it a little bit clearer?
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's almost like they're the small things that you do on a day-to-day, hour-by-hour basis are those support programs, and the critical things are what you really need to capture and document.
Yeah, so think of it like a good example I use in training is we're teaching someone to drive. And when they first start to drive, they go around the corner and they don't put the indicator on. And you have to keep reminding them, right? But after a while, that becomes a habit.
Yeah.
So support programs are like a habit. Wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. And then we won't have to remind you because you know that's really important and you're just going to do it anyway.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so we've focused quite a bit on food safety and food processing, but there's also a bunch of standards around, also on food, but food production, so more like farming systems and horticultural systems. So can you briefly then, David, just talk to us a little bit about the sorts of certification programs that are available?
Yeah, so there's some really good examples here, and these programs are a little bit different in they have an agricultural base. They're designed for the farmer. So they're still managing risk, but they're managing it with an appropriate system at the appropriate level, right? And think of it, you've probably all heard, from paddock to plate or, food to fork or whatever. What the whole thing about these systems is if everyone participates and does their little bit at their level, when we pass the product on to the next person, so we go from the farm to the processor or the exporter, if the farmer's done the right thing, the exporter, his job is easy, because we don't want it to go into the hand of the consumer and find that the farmer used the wrong chemical in the paddock and therefore the consumer dies because we didn't stop it in the beginning.
So this is around assurance for the whole supply chain or the whole value chain, which again, last month we spoke about that value chain from an export perspective. So this is giving that assurance that it's not just one step of the process, it's the whole supply that has adopted good practices, and that's measured by this particular certification program, whatever that may be.
Yep. And we teach people that they have the authority to stop the line. So you don't need authority to prevent a problem.
Because there's no point adding further value to a product that's not met the standard. You're just putting good money over bad, into that product that's never going to meet the standard because you've missed a step beforehand. Yep. Right. Now,
with the organic, obviously organic is becoming, a really, really important market segment these days.
Yeah.
And people pay premiums for organic. So our clients in the Pacific, they want to get into those premium markets. And it's pretty easy in the Pacific because farmers can't afford chemicals.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
So,
and importing them is expensive. Yeah.
The whole place is organic, and it's just so easy, but you can't just say it. You've got to prove it. So you have to follow the system and you have to satisfy the auditor that you understand what's required and you're doing the right thing.
Okay, so let's just have a little look. We've got a very short video to show on GAP. So that's Good Agricultural Practices. So let's just listen to this.
Whether you're growing papaya, lettuce, or bananas, you are connected with the farms and farmers that make up that community. To be successful, every farm in the community has to do their part. and that means making food safety a top priority. Think about it this way. All it takes is one problem on a single farm to change the reputation of a whole crop and the community that grows it. We've all seen what can happen. A few people get sick, and when the outbreak becomes news, the public becomes afraid to buy the produce, no matter where it comes from. The financial damage can be severe and lasting, destroying farms and livelihoods. The risk to both the farming community and the public is real. Now, there are specific steps you can take to minimize these risks. Here's how it works. When people buy produce, they want to know it's safe. That assurance can come from your farm being certified by the USDA. It's called Good Agricultural Practices, or GAP certification. And once your farm has it, the public can have confidence that you've been proactive and taken steps to minimize the possibility of foodborne illness and outbreaks. As you know, farming is a complex process. From the soil to the consumer, crops are touched multiple times, and each touch has its own potential for contamination. GAP certification is based on reducing the risks throughout this process. The USDA provides a simple checklist that is your guide to becoming GAP certified. By understanding each item in the checklist, you can prepare your farm to be reviewed. And with a successful review, your farm becomes certified and can sell its produce with confidence. And certification is only the beginning. Farms large and small are finding that being certified means greater opportunities as a business. It's a way to build a trusted reputation and have access to larger markets and premium markets that demand higher standards. There's no better way to ensure a hopeful future for your farm and community. Now is the time, before there's an issue, to take responsibility for your farm's food safety. Ready to learn more? This video is part of a series explaining each part of the checklist and how your farm can become GAP certified. Whether you're
Okay, so that's a little bit about GAP, and you've spoken about HACCP. They're quite common programs, aren't they? Like very well adopted programs, would you say, and well adopted in the Pacific?
Yeah, they're becoming more recognised. As Appy said, the attitude was that people thought that the local thing was okay, but definitely working towards an international certification has a lot more weight. And on the page here, we've got a number of different types of certification, and we've all heard of ISO. And ISO is famous for its quality standard, but they've now got lots of different standards within ISO for different components. And we've only listed 4, but there's actually hundreds of ISO standards. Fair trade, that's once again helping to protect environments, protecting exploitation of workers and farmers and child labor and all of that. We also have, some ones with religious requirements, and they're for specific markets where the people want an assurance that things are done in a certain way. And the last one there, provenance, is becoming really, really important. People want to know where their food comes from.
Yeah. So not quite an international standard, more of a national standard. But you're absolutely right. It's that we want authentic products from Fiji, Tonga, New Zealand, wherever. I mean, I know I've been somewhat upset as a tourist when I've bought a little souvenir from somewhere, only to get it home and read the label and find that it was actually made in China or Taiwan, but I bought it in Vanuatu. It's quite upsetting when you find that. So yeah, they're quite important, aren't they?
Yeah. So we've got some. One of the partners with BLP is based in Fiji, and they develop systems for tracking product, and they started with seafood, and they're now moving into agricultural. And this allows the consumer at the end to scan a QR code or something and see what the journey of that food product is. And that adds value, and people are prepared to pay a premium for that sort of information.
Yeah, so that feel-good thing, we know where this was produced. We know that, fair trade, it's helping farmers. We know, we can kind of visualize where that product's been on its journey to the end user. That's quite important to consumers these days, isn't it?
Yeah, and a good example of that is I've done or both Appy and I have worked on a project on lead in ginger.
Right.
And the US has very, very strict standards on lead, and they want all the ginger to have a less than 100 parts per billion of lead. Now, Fiji can meet the 40 parts per billion standard, but the product coming out of China can be as high as 400 parts per billion.
Mm-hmm.
Which would you like to eat?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? Okay, so many certification programs, many of them international programs that a business might want to think about in order to export their product, or even just sell their product to their domestic markets, and perhaps particularly when you're wanting to enter another market. I also think around tourism. There's quality marks in tourism. So we're all probably familiar with the star rating system for accommodation. That's another certification program. So really important to think about. What are the sorts of programs that would really benefit our business? Of course, BLP's got a quality assurance system too that I mentioned at the beginning. Our approved advisors is tantamount. It's kind of the same sort of thing. It's a certification program, albeit it's not it is international, it's across the whole Pacific, but it's not quite so well recognized as something like ISO or some of the other ones that we've been talking about. So that's really helpful. There's lots out there. Finding the right one, selecting the right one is perhaps the next challenge. Api, perhaps I can get you to outline some of the key benefits of gaining accreditation or certification to a recognised standards program, because understanding those benefits might help a business to select the right one. Oh, sorry, Api, I think you're on mute.
Okay. Thank you, Barbara. There are many benefits on certification, and those are at listed here are the four of the key benefit areas. Talking about market entry, like I've just had some examples here. Somebody that I've always wanted that person to get into certification, and said no, and then suddenly he's calling me every day. Because now FDA in US wants him to be certified.
Right.
Now he's bothering me and David.
So the USA, they're pretty strict, hey? Like you have to have a certification program, or they may even specify the certification program.
That's right.
Yeah.
So this is one thing. Market access is very important. To be able to get your product across, you need to find out what other the importing requirements, what sort of certification that is required. So you need to comply with that. So that is very important, getting certified with the standard that is required by the country to get your product across. And the other one, you have a competitive advantage. Like this company that is running up and down. Now if he's got other competitors who can easily get on the wagon and start exporting to US because he doesn't have the certification. So those are the things. You have a competitive advantage to that, and also the increased efficiency and reduce risk, like David has been mentioning. Yeah, just increase efficiency. Like you are confident. Like when you have certification, you are confident. Like when your product leaves a country, nothing is going to go wrong if every control is in place. and all the documents are, you monitor your document, you can have a check, and you know that everything, there's a tick, 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 and all that. It was at the right temperature, it was at the right time, and you feel good. You feel good that you have produced something that is safe and safe for the consumer. So there's increased efficiency there because there's a consistent standard implemented right throughout. Then your business and staff development, like, you know, like as David was mentioning before, through training, you know, we upskill people through training. I have taught, I have trained people who never went to secondary school, and some of them only up to from class 4 or class 5, grade 5 or grade 6, primary school. And I've trained them in HACCP. I've trained them in hazard analysis. I've trained them to understand critical control point. Wow. And I'm amazed. I'm amazed because they begin to understand the importance of food safety. They begin to understand the importance of the program, and they are proud to know, you know, like it gives them a feeling of pride that there's something they're learning, something new that they learn, and they can implement. Not just as the factory, I always tell them, you don't just implement it, you're going to implement it at home. At home, in the kitchen, with the children.
So just going back to that competitive advantage. So I suppose, you know, what you're saying there is you could have two different companies both producing the same sort of product, but because one's got an internationally recognized standard, we automatically think that that's going to be better than the other one doesn't, even though they may be identical. So that's a real plus. So if nothing else, that's the bottom line, really, isn't it? You know, it's appearance, but not just appearance. When you then look into what you mentioned about increased efficiencies and reduced risk, that whole framework that you've both explained, you know, that really does help your processes enormously, and it helps you to reduce the cost. So it helps you to produce not just a better product, but B, a cheaper product.
Yeah, can I just add something there, Barbara? Like I said before, the traditional method of testing a product at the end of a process. Okay? There's no need for that anymore. When you monitor your process right throughout the line, ensuring that your critical control points are in control, you're sure doing a good job, and you are sure, you are confident that your product is safe and sound. And when it leaves your factory, leaves your shore, you are confident and you feel good that you've done your job well. And that's certification.
Okay, now can you still hear me okay? All right. Okay, so I'm just getting a message saying that my connection's lost.
Oops.
Can't hear you.
You on mute, Barbara.
Sorry, I lost my connection, guys, but hopefully I didn't keep you waiting too long. Can you see my screen again?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, let's move on to topic number 4 then. So this is really now about the steps involved. So you've mentioned a little bit about the framework and those things. Can you explain what you do to get a business up to scratch to achieve an accreditation such as HACCP?
So the key thing we need to do is understand where the business is now, and then apply the standard to the business to bring them up to what's required, but also bring the staff along with it. So we're working on many different things at the one time. It could be the people, it could be the product, the packaging, the facilities, the storage, and we're gonna show you a quick slideshow in a minute that's going to help make sense of these things. But like the standards that we're working to, the key thing we do is follow a standard. We follow a process. It could be different for each person or each business, and that's one of the fundamentals of HACCP. A HACCP program is designed for that business. it may be similar to another business, but you need to understand what that business is doing because the hazards will be different. So we have the same discipline that we try and install in our clients, and that is to understand the standard, know the gaps, fill the gaps, put in place the controls to monitor and make sure we're on track, and that then we have a validation from an external party. So it's systematic, it's common sense, and it's appropriate for the business.
Fantastic. Okay, so you've really got a set way of doing things with your clients, and you don't really waver from that. Whatever the situation is, you always start from where are they currently, and you build from there.
Yep. Yeah, because we need to identify. We're following our process. Identify, assess, and then control.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's have a little look at some changes and transformations that you've actually been involved in initiating and creating with the companies that you've worked. So perhaps just talk us through some of these photos.
Yeah, so here's a classic photo. This is a cool room door, and you can see the door is rusty and there's bits of wood and it's very, very dirty. And then you can see with the training and the understanding, they've improved the situation. They've made it easy to clean, and just check out the difference in the lighting. The lighting in this facility was that poor. The photos were pink. So they couldn't even see the dirt because it was like working by candlelight.
Right.
Same here. They were washing all the equipment, but they didn't open the doors. They didn't pull off the blades. They didn't use the chemicals. They were using Omo laundry detergent, which has chemicals for washing your clothes, but not chemicals that you can eat.
Right.
So, we taught them how to clean stuff, how to scrub it, how to use soap and water, elbow grease, all of that sort of stuff. And once again, you can see the lighting. So here's an interesting one. This is a pack house that we started at. And you can see in the background there, they built the new pack house that they're building. So this is the old pack house, but look at the yard, look at the rubbish, look at the way there's just crap everywhere, mud. That's finished product that's going to be exported, sitting in the dirt, right? Because they didn't realise. This is how they used to get rid of their rubbish, and they'd take the finished product in that ute after carting waste and pigs.
So the same vehicle for the rubbish as for the clean product.
Yep. So, this is a new building, but there was rubbish everywhere.
So
oil.
They need to store their rubbish.
Yeah, oil, everything. And as we go through these shots, it just gives you a bit of an idea. This is where they got to. Cleaned up, organised. There's the new rubbish truck, and notice the yard is now getting concreted. And all the mud is gone. Big difference. This was their drain. It was just full of rubbish, and the smell was unbelievable, rotting vegetables. And this is a photo in progress, and they put in a filter system. And then the next one shows you what it was like in the end. It was easy to clean, fully enclosed, no problems. Here's their old pack house. Now, notice the product is on the ground, and see how black the floor is. The floor was moldy, and it had never been cleaned. It had been hosed off, but had never been cleaned. Here's their new system. Everything's up off the ground. The floor's clean. See, they're all lined up. much more organized. Drains easy to clean. See that you can see the concrete is clean. It's not black with mold. So this was their old way, just do it on the floor, do the best you can. And we had to train them. We had to explain why that's not suitable. And then they started to get the idea, and they found that they could buy these machines that helped clean the product and make it better. So, that's towards the end. When we first worked with them, this is how they were exporting their product. So a big part of HACCP is traceability, identification. And we went through a few stages. So the next photo shows they wrote on the codes by hand. And then they added some information. And see, these guys are exporting to Woolworths. Now, when we started with them, they were doing 1 container per week. They now do over 10. And it all happened because they got HACCP. All the cords were all over the ground and the trucks were running over them, and they got them organised. All their storage was up in a dry room and enclosed and away from the animals and stuff.
It's amazing, isn't it, how much packaging can get destroyed before it's even used and spoiled, so you can't use it before it's even used.
Yep. And we engaged these people, and these next couple of shots, showed, that was how dirty things were before. Just keep scrolling through, and just cleaning it up. See, the floor's no longer black. They actually got all that off. But see, this young lady, and I can't remember her name, but all of these gloves were all wet and moldy, and it was disgusting. And she took this on, she improved it. She would give the gloves out and clean them when they came back, and it was her little empire. And that was her part of HACCP.
A really nice little simple way of keeping those gloves sorted, so everybody knows which are their gloves, I guess, and they're off the ground, and like you say, they're kept dry. It's a cheap way to do it, huh?
And can't contaminate the product because the gloves aren't moldy. And when we first go there, often the things are made of wood and they're rotten and they stink. And then we get to the point where, they put in stainless steel equipment and really get organised, like in the next shot. Okay.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you both so much for sharing all this information. So I see we've got a question that's been popped in the chat room already, but please feel free, anyone, if you've got any other questions, please pop them in the chat box, or you can raise your hand if you like, and then turn on your microphone and ask your question. Benrico, you've asked a question. So given the growing number of accreditations and standards available, how can we monetize impact aside from margins and premiums realised through the operating activities? David Apiami, which one of you would like to answer that question?
So, yeah, I'm happy to answer that. You're right. There's a lot of standards, and we're currently working on a project with Pharma called the Decision Tree, and what we're trying to do is create a little system for clients and consultants to ask a number of questions and arrive at what would probably be the best program for this person to look at, because they're all similar, but they all have HACCP Codex as their foundation, for example, for food safety. But you don't want to go down the rabbit hole of collecting certifications and standards, because it can be very expensive.
Yeah, actually, what sort of costs? I mean, obviously the biggest cost is in implementing it, isn't it? Is doing it. But presumably there's some sort of a fee as well that you have to pay. Is that right?
Yeah. So the annual audit costs for HASA is around a minimum of 1,500 Aussie dollars a year.
Mhm.
And often if there's travel and stuff involved, but sometimes for a GFSI system, it can be up to $10,000 to $15,000 a year.
Mm.
So one of the really important things you've got to understand before you go down the rabbit hole is, if I do this standard, what is it going to cost? What is it going to cost to maintain? Not only from the point of view of the certification cost, but the labor and input you need, the paperwork, the ink, all of those things. And how is that going to reflect on my price?
Mm.
And am I going to get a better price in the market for my product? Or am I better to stay in the informal market? And a lot of people get scared about that, about asking for a better price.
Mm. And so that's where your export markets often come in, because you can't always ask a higher price in your domestic market,
No.
but you can if you go international.
Exactly. But you've also got to deliver. And it's a bit of a chicken and an egg, because if you don't have the standard, your chance of delivering is a bit haphazard.
Mm.
You might do it, but you might not.
Yeah. So implementing these kind of systems to achieve a standard retrospectively is obviously much more difficult than if you're doing it right from the word go. So, I mean, really, we should be encouraging any startup business to think about these kinds of certification programs right from the beginning of their business, not to just get going and start putting in systems to produce stuff, but to try and adopt a standard right from the word go.
Yep. And look, we call it beginning with the end in mind.
Right.
So your market might require a GFSI standard, which is the highest. But if you try and do that on day one, you haven't got a hope. So what we encourage people to do is take a pathway approach. So first thing they're going to put in is personal hygiene, GMP. Then they're going to make sure they've got basic records. So it's like building up. It's like teaching a child to talk.
Mm.
You don't talk in novels on the first day. You start with words.
Yeah.
And it's normally mum, 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 dad, dad, dad. And when they say that, you celebrate. You get excited. You smile. And that encourages them to add more words.
Mm.
And we try and do that with our clients. Don't run before you can walk. Don't walk before you can crawl.
Mm.
But it's like eating an elephant.
Yeah.
It's one bite at a time. You got to start.
Yeah, no, that's great advice, David, and certainly, I think you've covered an awful lot of information, both of you, in this presentation today. Any other questions from any of our participants? Okay, Tim's asking, in terms of assisting Pacific SMEs in terms of exporting market linkages, can BLP be able to subsidise the cost of these standards and accreditations? Well, look, I can answer that. BLP can certainly support with the cost of an advisory firm such as David and Api's organisation, and so that would help you get the standards and accreditation.
Yeah.
And there may well be other opportunities as well. So yeah, certainly.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. We're doing a lot of these programs, and we're just going into a round where we've got support from BLP and pharma. So this is giving the SMEs, a very small price of entry to something that could change their lives.
Fantastic. That's good to know. Any other questions, anyone? Okay, I'm mindful that we're a little bit over. It's 3:10. We did say we're going to take just over an hour, and I think yeah, we're doing pretty good on the time. But anything else, anyone? Oh, Shimron, sorry. Are there any standards that can benefit e-commerce platform, and how can this certification help us? How can we help our vendors, e.g. SMEs? That's a very good question. So do you know of any standards around e-commerce?
Yes, definitely there's an ISO standard.
Right.
As I said, there's many ISO standards. We only listed a few. But you definitely find there's a standard. We obviously, data and all of that is a really important part of any certification, and making sure people have secure data backed up, all of that sort of stuff is really important as well. So yep, there will definitely be standards around that.
Fantastic, thank you. Any other questions, anyone? Okay, we're getting lots of thanks coming in there. Okay, oh well, look, thank you again. Thank you everyone for joining in today. It's great to have your input and your questions, and it's great to have you on board. Now, as I mentioned before, next month our webinar is going to be on risk management, and we're going to explore more around contingency planning, which is of course another very important business advisor skill. And very related to today's topic. Now, before you drop off, please can I ask that you take a couple of minutes and just give us some feedback on today's webinar. Sandra's just posted the link to that survey, so please just click on that survey. It'll take you about 2 seconds to do, really, literally, it's very short. But it does help us to know whether we're on the right track with our webinars. It helps us to focus on what topics you want to cover in this series. So thank you very much, everyone. Our next webinar is going to be in another month's time on Thursday, the 16th of September, 2 p.m. New Zealand time. So just make sure you get that timing right for your country. That does now conclude our webinar for today. Thanks again, Apiame. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. Malo, Whawhatai Lava. Thank you, Tomas Vinaka. Metaki Mayata, and looking forward to seeing you all again next month. Mā te wā.
Vinaka.